A very good afternoon and welcome to this series of discussions on the impact of COVID on various issues. This afternoon we'll be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on food systems in this country, in Uganda. What does it exactly mean? We've encountered food in relation to what government is distributing or what it promised to distribute, what it has distributed, who has received and who hasn't received, the quality of food, and who else is providing food. Is that only where we need to stop this discussion? What else is involved? I have a very special panel. My name is Charles Mwangusha Mpagi, and we're coming to you live from the studios of NTV. I have two guests in studio now. I have other guests joining me via technology, Zoom, using these other interactive technologies, including Zoom. I'll be introducing them in a moment. Let me start with the people I have in studio. I have Miss Jane Irama Ochaya. Jane, very nice to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Jane is interim country director at OXFAM Uganda. Yeah. You don't need a lot more of introduction. If you say OXFAM Uganda, we're having discussions and your areas of interaction. Very nice to have you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Good evening, viewers and listeners.
I have with me Agnes Kirabo, Executive Director at Food Rights Alliance. Agnes is a food rights activist. He's a food activist. Is that the right one? Is it food rights or food activist? Which is which?
The fact of the matter is that right is a human, food is a human right, and it is the only right described as fundamental in the Bill of Rights, the right to adequate food. Yes, so.
A pleasure to have you this afternoon.
Thank you so much, and good evening, viewers and listeners out there.
Okay, I'm being joined via Zoom by Henry Richard Kimera from Buate. Mr. Kimera, do I have you? I can see you trying to communicate, but I can't hear you yet. People in the studio should be able to deal with that and bring you on. Henry?
Good afternoon, and it's nice to have you all having me on to the program.
Thank you, Henry. We'll be looking forward to hearing from you. Henry is a food rights activist and standards expert. When you talk about food, you also need to talk about standards. That's been coming out a lot during this lockdown period. I also have from Kololo, joining us via Zoom, Dr. Antonio Querido. Dr. Querido is the head of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Uganda. Very nice to have you, Doctor.
Good evening, Charles. Warm greetings to your viewers.
Thank you.
And thank you to NTV for hosting us and for the importance of this discussion today.
Thank you very much. And Eid Mubarak to all our Muslim brothers and sisters, wherever you're watching us from. Some of you are joining us via the live transmission on TV. Others are joining us via Zoom and our social media platforms. We'll be making them available for you to interact with us and put questions. We will be joined, I think, along the way by the Minister for Agriculture, which will be helping us to understand, at least at government level, what's going on. I want to start with Dr. Querido. On this critical question, COVID-19 is a global pandemic. It's disrupted normal life, not just in Uganda, but all over the world. And the food situation speaks beyond Uganda. I want to start with you to give us a perspective from where you sit at the Food and Agriculture Organization on what we've been going through and the kinds of responses especially this government and other governments have undertaken to deal with the question of mitigating any projected hunger and malnutrition issues that COVID-19 might cause.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for the opportunity. I would like once again to send my greetings to all the members of this panel. And for FAO is an opportunity for us to be here with you and to discuss the importance of food security and particularly the food system for the security of all of us. As you know, the food system of Uganda is quite resilient. It's not too much dependent on the external market, but definitely as we go forward and deal with the impact of COVID-19, it is important that we take a set of relevant decisions to ensure that we cope with the COVID-19 situation. Globally, FAO is concerned with the lives and livelihood because, as you know, the impact of the measure, the right measure that we're taking to curb this spread of this disease will definitely impact the food system. Therefore, for us, we are with our partners looking at the global level to see how we take the right policies and guide the government to ensure that the right decision is taken at the right moment to deal with the situation of COVID-19 on food security. We have done recently an analysis at the end of April that shows clearly that if the right decision in the right time and the effective policy are not put in place, more than millions of people will join the ranking of the hungry people in the world. Studies indicate that anywhere between 14 million to 80 million additional more people will likely to join this rank of the hungry people. Of course, this severity of this impact will depend on the level of contraction caused by the COVID-19, the recession, an economic recession caused by the COVID-19. So it's upon us, it's upon all the governments to be mindful of these challenges and to continue to put in place policies that are important to support the food system.
This
the food system
Dr. Corridor,
or the future of the food system in Uganda will depend, of course, on the right decision that all actors that will take to ensure that the value chain along the food value chain is adequately addressed.
Okay.
From the production of the crop production to livestock, fisheries, but also to forestry and including transportation, retailing, wholesale, and of course, when we deal with food systems, we also deal with the preparation and disposal. So it is important for all actors to be mindful because any small decision that you take with potential disruption on the food system will definitely impact it.
Okay.
I would also add that the food system is, the future of food system in Uganda would also depend on the set of policies that the government of Uganda is putting in place.
Okay.
At the global level, the UN has been convening the players, particularly the important actors, the private sector, the public sector, but also the financial institution, the farmers' organization, to ensure that we discuss and the policies that are important for countries to address, as I mentioned, in the right time, to ensure that we cope with COVID-19.
Okay.
I recall all your viewers that recently FAO and African Union convened a meeting of African ministers of agriculture, where all of them also committed to support or to put in place measures that are relevant to a food system in the continent, but also to ensure that we come to the aid of most vulnerable. As you know, UN as a global level, we have launched an appeal, an emergency appeal of humanitarian for an humanitarian response, where food security is at the center of this response, to see how we support the nations to deal or to cope with these challenges.
Okay.
FAO main activity in this plan is around about 4 main axes. The first one is this, to see how we create a system of data collection that is together with our key partners. The second one is to ensure the stability of the access to food, but also the stability of income.
Okay.
The third action that we, as FAO, we're proposing in this global plan is to see how we create the conditions to continue to support
yes.
To
Go
continue
ahead.
to support. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead. Go ahead. We can hear you. We hear you very well. Yes. We're with you.
To continue to,
yes,
to support the supply chain. We have to maintain the supply chain alive to ensure that all players within food system can effectively act and work to continue to produce the food needed to all of us. Okay. As you know, more than 70% of the food in our continent, in Africa, is produced by women. This particular group also, they care for the children, they care for the sick, they care for the elderly. So they are particularly exposed to the COVID, to the virus. Okay. So these have the potential impact on the hands that feed us. So as we be supporting the government to ensure that the food production system continue to function and continue to be alive, we have to be mindful of the protection of this group.
Thank you.
We also know that the majority of the farmers, they are on the age above the average, because the youth around the world are less interested in agriculture. So also we have a particular group, a population that produces the food that is vulnerable, that is within the group, the so-called group risk of COVID-19, of the virus, coronavirus. Therefore, all the measure for us to ensure that we that have a food supply that comes to our market and our table are mindful of this situation.
Thank you.
You can see
I'll come to you in a moment. I'll come back to you in a moment.
Any disruption
okay.
in terms of access to market or caused by quarantine, but restriction of movement of the people will definitely impact the food production system. Therefore, as a UN system, we've been working with our partners to ensure that they're mindful of these interconnections and they put in place policies that are important to support all the actors within food chain.
Thank you. I'll be coming back to you in a moment. I just needed a clarification from you on the figure you gave us, 14 to 18 million people getting food insecure. Where does that number speak to? I want to come back into studio here and come to you, Agnes. You live food and food rights. Recently, you've added on that list, no, for a long time, you've also added on that list water and access to water. You've also, you do governance, because all these are linked in one or the other. My question is, at the beginning of the lockdown in March, world over, almost, priority was put on health concerns. Number 2 for this country, security. because you knew that if people are not accessing work, insecurity could be the next thing. So you have the curfews and other things. The discussion about food comes in much later. And what we have seen of the food discussion is we have a group of people who live in Kampala, primarily, Wakiso and the neighboring areas in the metropolis here, who feed hand on what they earn on a daily basis. So someone wakes up in the morning, goes to work, and expects that when you get some money, then you are able to carry a bag of what to feed your family with. And that's what government focused on. How is the situation from where you sit of food and COVID-19 in this country?
Thank you so much, Charles. It is my humble desire that we pick lessons from COVID-19 and our responsive measures. At Food Rights Alliance, we screamed at the beginning of March when actually the threats of COVID-19 finding foot in Uganda started being visible and real. And we warned the government that actually before you assemble the health teams, assemble the food teams. But because over the years, people in Uganda, irrespective of status, have been taking the issues of food for granted. At that time, nobody hit our call. We need to highlight that food is an underlying determinant of health. It's an underlying determinant of security. No amount of security can keep indoors hungry people. That one I bet. No amount of security. You can pull out all the arms and everything, but so long as the population is hungry, they will jump out. They may not jump out because they are not working, because anyway, so many Ugandans look forward to a public holiday not to work. They are going to jump out because they cannot feed themselves. If government immediately realized that there is this category of people in the country who live on hand to mouth, my question from a governance perspective is, what have we been doing all along? You looked at a category that you assumed that they are living on hand to mouth and forget that there are millions of people. The country rep of FAO has just told us that 14 to 18 million people are joining the statistics of the hungry. But the statistics the country has is 10.4 million people plus have been sleeping hungry. So you can just imagine if 10.4 million people have been sleeping hungry and we are adding on 18 million people, you wonder what was the basis of us saying we are only going to extend food portions to 1.5 million people. COVID-19 has revealed that actually hunger in Uganda is not only in Karamoja. Because interestingly, I did not see cries and riots for food in Karamoja. I saw the cries for food in Butambala, in these other rural districts where we thought by imagination that actually food is available. So the status of food and nutrition security here in Uganda is worrying, and it is even more worrying that a lot of attention has been paid to the rural areas and perpetual hungry areas like Karamoja. And we had all the years neglected the hunger situation that is reigning around the capitals and the cities at all levels and everywhere in this country.
Doesn't that sound like a contradiction? Because if you hear from government officials from most of normal life, the reason we've gone through 2 months of lockdown and are still able to move on is that, one, food is available, two, it's reasonably cheap. I was looking at statistics from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics the other day. Food inflation is at an all-time low because, there's actually food deflation, if you want to look at it that way. It does not speak to you like a contradiction?
It isn't. You see, I have always said that figures don't lie, but they can be used to lie. Let us look at the realities of the situation. If food was available and food was actually cheap, why did we end up where we ended, only with an attempt of buying a few kilograms or tons of posho as a country? And you remember the distribution of food, if I may use that as an example, took forever to start, and it has been done forever. The food that was meant to be supplied in the first 14 days of the lockdown has taken 2 months. And hope they have not forgotten that people still need food, that when the president declared a partial opening, that they are going to stop distributing food. But the reasons that the government officials were giving us was that we haven't been able to assemble food. So if food was available, why did it take a government forever to assemble food? And when they eventually assembled food, they assembled things that looked like food.
How do you mean things that look like food?
What do you mean? Of course, if 80% of the food that was collected was declared unfit for human consumption, for me that wasn't food. It is things that looked like food. And you know what it means? If somebody had produced 10 kilograms of maize and 3 kilograms of that cannot be eaten, but also the other kilograms remaining are only being tolerated, but not 100% save for human consumption. So it is true the food may be in this country, and I'm being happy with the country rep saying moving forward we should invest so much in information and data. There has been food in this country, and some parts of the country, in this small country, there is a lot of food going to waste. And in another part of the country, there is no food. So while government was struggling to find maize flour by standard and beans, at the lockdown, people had the potatoes, they had the pumpkins, they had the vegetables, they were rotting. And they couldn't see that food through the system to feed those that actually needed it. So the food could be there, but there is a mismatch because we do not have data, we do not have the infrastructure to see the food distributed throughout the food system. And we attach value to every single amount of food that has been produced.
From your perspective, what is the problem? Is the problem lack or absence of food, or that food being distributed? Is it the system that distributes the food to where it is needed, or is it the absence of actual food?
I think let me take a risk by responding this way. The food system in Uganda is stuck in the absence of a governance system.
How do you mean?
We do not have a governance system. The food governance system in Uganda, I'm not going to say it collapsed. It has never existed. We have been in imaginations. Let us talk about the basics. Now, if government was supposed to hold somebody, an agency, responsible for the fact that government could not easily touch food to give its people, who should they hold accountable? Are they going to hold accountable agriculture that the food wasn't produced? Who are they going to hold accountable?
I wish the minister was here, because we're expecting the minister to join us in this discussion. I hope he's still on the way. I wish he was yet to give us a government position.
Yeah, but even if the minister is going to join us and give us a governance position, you can just, a government position, you can just imagine if the president comes out and say, I have learned and I confess, if we are going to build Uganda on a firm ground, we have to start by addressing the fundamental human needs. And he mentioned food first, and then went on to mention health, he mentioned education, and he mentioned shelter, and then the list moved on. But all these ones that he mentioned have institutional infrastructure in this country. They have the legal infrastructure. We do not have the legal infrastructure for food. We do not have the institutional infrastructure for food. So food belongs to everyone, and eventually it has belonged to nobody.
Okay. Jen, I need you to come in here. From where you sit at OXFAM, what's your view of the situation? You work with farmers. You work with different groups.
Yes.
You've been involved in climate change, and you're involved in other things. What are the implications from where you sit of what you're hearing from Agnes and what you heard from Antonio?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Charles. Well, first of all, to say that our work covers both the development perspective and humanitarian. So we support development programming and work with refugees as well. In relation to food security and the work that we do, and poverty and inequality, I think the first thing we need to recognize is that over the years we have actually seen a decline in poverty. Okay, so that has been happening. The data reveals that that is the situation. But at the same time, we are seeing a rise in inequality. And in many ways, this is attributed to several factors, including food security. So food security is a major factor that has affected many people. And it has actually even been recognized in the official data. So for instance, last year, the Ministry of Finance, in the data they released, indicated that because of malnutrition, the burden of malnutrition was about $500 million in terms of added expenditure in the health sector, for diseases, in terms of impacts in other areas. So there is a recognized understanding that because of food security, there's malnutrition, and this is impacting on the household as well as on the aggregate economy. So that is one point to note. But on the other hand, it's also very important to recognize that when you look at the household, distribution of households, okay, you have quite a number that actually spend a large part of their earnings, their income on food. So the Uganda Bureau of Statistics has indicated that about 45.5% of household income is spent on food. So if you look at this current situation where many people have depleted their resources, they've probably depleted their savings, so it puts them in a very vulnerable situation. So in terms of meeting their needs for food security moving forward. So this is going to have implications on increased poverty. It's going to have implications on inequality on the one hand. In terms of the aggregate economy, it's also going to have implications on other sectors. If before this crisis, we were already spending $500 million because of malnutrition, what are we going to spend after this crisis in the health sector?
So what you're saying is...
So there are a lot of implications across the board on the household as well as in terms of the aggregate economy. In terms of our work as OXFAM, we look at food security and poverty and inequality from a broad perspective. So from the perspective of land rights, because it's important that you look at the factors of production. So land is very important, and this is one of the issues which is going to become increasingly important moving forward, both in terms of within communities as well as from an external perspective, you know. With the issues around labor, and as the head of the FAO indicated, the issue around women's labor in terms of agricultural production is very important, and this is one of the issues that we're also trying to address. So in terms of trying to ensure that we have women realize their land rights on the one hand, women realize their broader rights in terms of being able to live free of violence, in terms of being able, their work being recognized in terms of other people contributing to this work. So from a broad perspective, those are some of the issues that we're looking at. We're also looking at the issues around food security from the perspective of financing. Financing is very important, and from the perspective of business. Okay,
I just wanted to go back on something small, on something you said. You gave a statistic, 45.5% of an average household's income is spent on food.
Yes.
And you said that does this mean, from your perspective, that if my income is reduced,
definitely,
what gets reduced in terms of on that percentage?
Yeah.
If my 100%, if I was earning a million shillings per month, and I'm spending 450,000 of that on food for my household, if my income drops
to 600,
to say 600,000, how does that affect food?
Well, that means if you've been eating 2 meals a day, you're going to go to 1 meal a day. Yeah. So it's going to have a direct impact on nutrition and on food intake, and many people will resort to reducing their expenditure on food, and it could also have an impact on the quality of food. Instead of maybe having a more balanced meal, it will be less. Yeah, so it does have an implication.
So both, what you're going to do is that you're going to reduce the portions, you're going to reduce
The quantity.
the quantity and the quality.
And the quality.
Yes, because now you're going to find cheaper options
Yes.
to fit within that reduced budget.
Yeah.
Let me just throw this back to you, to the two ladies here, and then I'll come to Mr. Kimera and Dr. Querido in a moment. In a nutshell, Agnes, if you could just help us and our viewers understand, in concrete terms, how has COVID-19 impacted food?
Okay, one, there is a universal definition of what is food security. And without repeating it word by word, the two critical phrases in that definition is that every man or woman at all time, without discrimination, have access to food that is required of your dietary needs, or means of its procurement. So you either have access by
to
any
the
form,
actual food,
yes,
or you have the money
means to go
purchase
and
it.
buy it.
Okay.
And the directives to manage the widespread of COVID-19 cut off the second option. And it is quite very unfortunate that for a couple of years, this government, decades of years, this government decided to take an approach to food security that is defined as food security through the market. That so many people were encouraged to meet their food needs through the market. And that is why there is hardly a food production within the urban areas. The thinking was the people will go and buy food. So with the directives to limit the widespread of COVID-19, so many of us were pushed out of the means
To produce
of
food.
earning, and buy the food. So when the president was like, except to the farmers, go on the farm, please go and produce, there was a quick form of forgetting that for so many years from Plan for Modernization of Agriculture, we have been preaching food security through the market. So we cannot have the incomes to go into the market. But also secondly, the people in the rural areas that produce food, they use that food to meet other dietary needs and other livelihood needs. They sell part of this food and then they buy, of course, not so many of them farm fish or fat and other foods that are required to make the food pyramid whole. So they could not sell the food because the common marketplace for farmers is the community markets. These were part of the initiatives that were closed first. So many of them could not sell the food. So we are having the people in the urban areas who are earning through the market. They are not earning, so they are not eating. But also we are having people in the rural areas who are just feeding on what is available. They cannot meet other dietary needs.
Let's put it this way, Agnes. You have, across Western Uganda, mostly, the price of bananas, which is the most commonly available staple for especially Western and Central Uganda, the price on the farm has collapsed to about 3,000 a bunch.
But the price in the city?
The price in the city has also reasonably come down, between 12,000 to 15,000 for a medium-sized bunch, and maybe about 20,000 to 25,000 for a big bunch. But the question is, the farmer in Bushenyi, in Fort Porto, in Kabarole rather, in Kienjojo, who is producing this matoko, in Masaka, will calculate, is 3,000 worth it for me to send? But if I earn 3,000, can I then afford to buy a kilogram of meat?
That is the trap. And it is not only happening to the banana, the banana farmers, like the matoke farmers that you have given as an example. You saw what happened to the poultry farmers.
Yes.
I can only define it by saying we have been eating the laying bird. Because once the farmer gets frustrated and is not going to be encouraged to produce, the motivation to produce is out of the returns that you made in the previous production.
Okay.
And if you cannot make those returns, it means so many farmers are going to abandon. So in the short term, for some of the foods, people have been, those who could afford, they have access to them on a relatively cheaper, but we are going to pay for that.
Yeah, because
in the medium term, the food prices are going to go.
No, the price of eggs has already started going up. It dropped to about 7,000 shillings, 7,500. I think if you check now, it's gone back in the regions of 8,500 to 9,000. Yes. And it can only continue going up. Let me bring in Mr. Chimera. Mr. Chimera, from where you seated there, two primary concerns that come when you discuss food. One is its availability and affordability. The other question is about its quality. Or the question of standard. From where you sit, how has COVID-19 impacted these two critical questions about the food that we eat or we're supposed to have as a right?
First, what I'm going to share with you, colleagues and viewers, it's from a consumer perspective, and that's what has led me into joining in standards development. And I would say that COVID has done a very good audit for us as a country to show us that there is a need to focus on one important element with regards to food security and nutrition. You cannot have food security if you do not have safe food. All the issues Jane, Agnes, and the doctor, His Excellency the FAO representative, if you take unsafe food, you get foodborne diseases. All the nutrients that you've taken in are dilated, or you fall sick and you cannot be productive. So food safety in all this is a very key benchmark. So as a country, we have been audited by COVID to show that the food relief that came in at first, or even that is still coming in certain aspects, does not meet some of the minimum standards. So this is very key. One element that I would like to put is that as a country, we have over 1,000 standards that facilitate having quality food, right from farm inputs, getting into what type of fertilizer we need, how approaches we do as we are harvesting, how we handle it in transportation, processing, up to marketing it and consuming it as consumers. Unfortunately, COVID has shown us that the instruments that we have in place, like the policy, legal, and regulatory frameworks, we are not using them effectively to safeguard the consumers in this country. So it is very key, like Dr. said from FAO, that the legal regulatory frameworks and plus institution should be in place to facilitate. When issues started coming out that the quality of the food that was being distributed was not up to the minimum standards, it was something that those of us who have been advocating for years to have a systematic food safety regime, we said now it is time for institutions that have been that are in place to provide this to come up and do the needful. Charles, as a country, like I said earlier, we have got standards that look right from the inputs to the end products, up to right from, let's say, the farm shop or the farm store to the food table. The most challenging aspects that COVID has shown us that institutions that are supposed to deliver are either not facilitated to do that or they are not recognized. You could see a difference when National Bureau of Standards came on board and started doing its role as a competent authority. We have realized that in some sections there is cleaner food that is being given to the consumers to guarantee them their food security, nutrition through safe food.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Kimera.
Okay. So this is why I find that it is very important as a way forward to have a resilient food system, food safety that guarantees the food security and food and nutrition security needs to be brought to the table and up front. There is one commendable aspect that I need to bring in. Government has invested in institutions like the National Bureau of Standards, which has got a modern food safety laboratory today. Through with different stakeholders, we have developed standards. I'm saying we, as I'm part of the committees that develop standards for food or that are food related. One challenge that we are facing as a country, and that is impeding the resiliency of the food system and food security, is the implementation of the food standards. In that, the policies are in place like the standards, but one of the most important component that will help to bring about the realization of that is inspection. You'll find that inspection, where to look at the quality of food that comes onto the market, is minimal, whereas COVID has shown us whether whatever social status we are in, we are all vulnerable, as because we are all consumers. So the quality of food is going to be very key from today onwards, and issues that are relating to it need to be brought to the forefront. And now that we have seen the importance of the National Bureau of Standards, it is time that National Bureau of Standards doesn't need to go back, it needs to stay on the value chain, checking out the kind of food that comes onto the market, checking out the food that is on the market, and checking out the food that we, the consumers, receive. I would like to commend the consumers who raised the red flag, and they helped COVID to show the audit of our food system lacking in certain aspects.
Henry, that's where there's a very interesting dichotomy. You saw a food distribution truck arrive, I think, in Kamuli, Eastern Uganda. Was it in Kamuli or Bujiri? One of those two districts. And people descended on it, grabbed all the food, removed it from the truck, even before there was room for either police to intervene, for social distancing, to make sure. That speaks to about one or two things that most of the panelists here have talked about. One is that the assumption that food insecurity was only resident in Karamoja or in urban areas in Kampala was a fallacy. Number two is that people are going to put the need to feed their stomachs ahead of any standard considerations about standards and quality. And then number three, Kimera, you talked about where was the food, and I think Agnes also talked about it. When we needed the food, was it actually available? As you go now, we've passed 2 months under lockdown. No one knows. The World Health Organization has said, be prepared to live with this for a much longer period of time. So we can't know how long this will run out. Is that supply source sustainable if it's food in the market? I want to throw this out to all the panelists. So whoever can jump in here, I'll be happy to hear from you.
So
yes, Kimera, let me start with you.
The food supply can be sustainably available. I would like to start with, if garbage in, garbage out. Now, if we have the policy, legal and regulatory framework, it should be invested in to provide the supply side with quality inputs. Then the extension system should be there to guide the farmers to follow good agricultural practices. Post-harvest needs to play a role, because we lose a lot more than 40% due to poor handling practices. And you find we have got food loss and waste. Because just take what was collected to distribute and was rejected, 28%, that was waste. It took natural resources to produce that waste. It is due to bad handling. Now, Charles, as a country, we have institutions that are there to facilitate, but they are not facilitated to the requisite to fully facilitate or fully to do the fully fledged requirements of them.
Okay.
In my thinking, it is important that post-COVID, all this COVID era, agriculture and food sector should be put on top priority.
Thank you.
Like Agnes alluded to earlier, we cannot have security if the food soldiers are hungry.
Okay.
Let's take a foodborne disease. Catches everybody. We are going to be a non-productive country.
Thank you.
So it is very key and important that we plug in all these elements that are going to facilitate wholesome food and nutrition security.
Okay. Let me get in Jane here, and then I'll come to Dr. Querido, and then I'll come back to you, Agnes. This same, it's a kind of a conundrum where you have food, its availability, its distribution, its quality, and long-term sustainability, especially in an era like we're dealing with of COVID-19, because it's brought all these to the fore, as you have ably discussed here. How do you get out of it?
Okay, there are a number of things that need to be done. First of all, I think it's very important that during this time, which is the time when farmers should be planting, they are facilitated to do that. So it's important that food production does continue, and the farmers need to be provided with the inputs to do that. Extension services need to be provided for that to happen. So that must happen so that we don't get into a situation some months down the road where there's actually no food production at all. So that must happen. But in order for that to happen, we need to see the agriculture sector better facilitated. And this is an argument which civil society organizations have been making. I think I can remember even since the time of the Plan for Modernization of Agriculture. We need to see better resourcing of the Ministry of Agriculture. In the current budget framework paper for the budget for 2020-21, the Ministry of Agriculture has been allocated 3.2%. That's about 950 billion, just less than $1 trillion, which is insufficient if you actually consider that the contribution of this sector to the economy, in terms of GDP, the number of people who are employed in this sector, who work in this sector, and then the long-term, the ramifications that we've been discussing. You know, some of the issues which Agnes also raised, the issues around hunger and public action, and the need to ensure that citizens' rights to food security are met and their livelihood security. So it's important that we see a better resourced agriculture ministry and agriculture sector. And I know some of the arguments that have been made over the years are that if you have roads, then you have market access, so goods can get into the market. So in a way, you're supporting agriculture. Now we have seen that has not worked.
Yes.
It hasn't worked because you actually have, you have, in some instances, you do have the roads, but you have productivity, you have products which are not able to get to the market, you have people stuck with goods. So it's a challenge. So so we need better resourcing in that sense.
Just a minute, how do you reconcile that with what you hear if you're listening keenly to government officials speak, including the president, who's given us 14 addresses since COVID-19 started and then has spoken on other occasions, what appears to be running in the minds of the people who run government is that on the food situation, the country is okay. I don't know if you hear it the same way as I do, that the country is okay, and said, no, lockdown did not affect agricultural productivity. Food markets are open and have been open since the beginning. The markets women and men who, if they could stay in the market, they could, as they sell food, should stay and sell food. Shops that sell food-related items should remain open. The thinking is that the food is actually sorted. We're discussing just before I came on air that about 28 tons, the 28% of the rejected food that UNBS did not pass should not be allowed to get back into the food system, whether it's whether it is as fertilizer or as feed for animals, because it will come back in the same food, in the same system, and get back and get consumed and have impacts. I don't seem to feel the urgency with which you're presenting this within government circles, that wait a minute. I think everybody seems to be like, okay, we are lucky in Uganda, we have food, so our measures can work. The other measures can work. We
have the immediate needs, and the immediate needs are that actually people are hungry. In many areas. We have, yes, there are some people who may be in rural areas and have access to their gardens, but not everyone will have access to the garden, you know. So there may be some people who have access and can get food, but I think the immediate need is that, yes, people are hungry. That is one. Two, because people are not able to earn, they do not have the resources to go and purchase food. So I think that is a major challenge. So there's need for critical remedial measures right now. And I know that a lot of resources have been raised for the COVID response. So it's important that those resources are targeted to support food security needs of the population. Okay. That must be done.
Agnes, I'd like you to hold your views for now, for a moment, and Dr. Querido, hold your views. We take a quick commercial break, but when you come back, you have other issues emerging. We're discussing food security and the impact of COVID-19 on food and food security and food systems in the country. But you have added challenges now. You have locusts ravaging a part of the country. You have floods that are distributed all over the country, from Kasese, Bundibugyo, Kabale, Kisoro to Kwen. Then you have caterpillars here in central Uganda that are eating up the food. When you put all these together, what do they mean? Immediate, medium term, and long term. We'll discuss that after a very short commercial break. We'll be right back. You're still watching a talk show coming from NTV. We're discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the future of Uganda's food system. This is put together by Food Rights Alliance, OXFAM Uganda, and we have the country representative of Food and Agriculture Organization. We also have, who's joining us from Kololo, but live. We have Mr. Henry Richard Kimera from Buwate. We have in studio here Agnes Kirabo, Executive Director at the Food Rights Alliance, FRA, and I also have the Interim Country Director of Oxfam Uganda, Jane Ochaya Irama. We're going to be joined by another panelist. Margaret Masudio is a farmer and will be joining us from Adjumani. She'll be coming on any moment from now. I want to go to Dr. Querido. You have COVID-19 and its impact on the food systems across the board and how much it has helped us reveal our actual food situation in the country, because we have not had the situation that has shaken up the country this big that affects the entire country. Number two, you have desert locusts in a part of a perennially endangered or food insecure region of this country that for the last few years has been coming out of that situation. The Karamoja sub-region, much of eastern Uganda, which has been invaded by desert locusts. And then you have floods ravaging almost across the country, sweeping away actual crops that are in the garden, making it difficult for people to dry and process and harvest their crops. And now, more recently, you have you have the invasion of caterpillars near central Uganda. What does this mean? Short term, medium term, and long term?
Thank you, Charles. As you know, agriculture is a risky business. And in fact, the production systems is quite sensitive. Therefore, that's what we see in terms of the impact either on the supply side and the demand side because of the restriction in place. When you have a restriction in the movement of the people, when you have people not having access to market, people changing their behavior in terms of consumption, definitely you will have a stress on your food production system, and this stress, it requires an in-depth analysis and decisions that really deal with it. And because we have a number of actors that are in place, it is important that we discuss on a very multi and diverse settings to ensure that we cater for the needs of different actors along the food chain. The panelists have mentioned a number of critical aspects related to food security. Food safety is important. We have been in discussion with the government to see how we revisit the notion of strategic food reserve, how we look at ways of creating community food banks and the community seed banks to ensure that the system having in place sufficient resilience to deal with the shocks like COVID-19. Of course, you have seen across the globe, the COVID-19 impact has been quite major. We've seen some countries with the bigger economies, with the more solid set of economic tools, struggling to see how they respond to this, to the COVID-19. Our countries, as you mentioned, we are already confronted by, we're grappling with a number of other disasters. So this really puts our capacity to cope, our capacity to deal with the situation in a much stressed position. So the role of everyone, the role of all players here is quite important, but the role of the government to provide the right incentives, to realize how you address this challenge is quite important. Yes, Locust is still with us. As you know, even in other cases, in other countries that they had similar challenge, it took a couple of years for them to deal with the situation. But I would say that when it comes to Locust, at least we are better prepared to respond. And so far, we've been with support of the government of Uganda and all support of our partners, working in monitoring the situation in more than 24 districts. And we have been able to treat more than 4,000 hectares of land. This represents a substantial gain in terms of what we have saved, not to have the destruction of the locust, but we still have almost 2 million hectares of land that are in danger because the climate is still favoring the locust. So the situation in Kenya, we know that they are still reproducing, and Uganda is a corridor for them to go up to South Sudan. So we will continue to have waves of swarms. So it is upon us to be organized, to ensure that we have in place all it takes to respond in a systematic manner. Concerning the flood, we have seen that it's quite recurrent, and sometimes in the same places. And so we have to go back and also analyze what's happening in terms of our interaction with the Mother Nature that is trigger certain of these disasters that are not natural, but they are man-made. Therefore, we have to learn and to see what we have to do while we respond to support these communities that have been affected by flood and by landslides, by mudslide, but also to learn from it in a ways that we do not repeat or allow this to continue to happen. We also have to address the issue of COVID in terms of the market supply, but in terms of the demand, because the impact of COVID, in both on demand and also on the supply side, will be felt at a different time. So it is important that we really, together with all actors, look at the impact. What we are doing as a UN system is to, under leadership of the UNDP, but with the contribution of a number of UN agencies. I will not name all of them to risk to miss one, but we are trying to do a social economic assessment, to look at the macroeconomic aspects, but also to look at tourism sector, to look at the transport sector. But food security and nutrition is a central part of this economic assessment. We need to take measures that are based on the evidence. We need to take measures that really allow the countries to take, to look at this also as an opportunity to reset certain things that are not functioning well, but to create an internal capacity to deal with other stress. So it is important for us to understand. So I believe that in 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be having this social economic studies. It will be shared widely and asking the contribution of all of partners to look at what is happening at detail, but to look at all the interconnectiveness that is important for us to address.
Thank you.
Food security, from the perspective, as some of your guests have mentioned, in terms of food safety, it is important that we also revisit some regulatory framework. I can tell you that with MAIF, but also with the parliamentarians and with the OPM, we have begun discussing to see how we go back to food and nutrition bill for this to work as an umbrella, to provide a number of the response that Agnes has raised, but also Jane and Henry has pointed out that we need to have to look at food security and nutrition security in a very comprehensive manner, and the regulatory measures are quite important. As a UN system too, we're also we have launched an appeal, a global appeal for UN Uganda, with the contribution in the spirit of One UN, under the leadership of Rosa Malango. We have launched a couple of weeks ago this UN appeal to support the government of Uganda to deal with the COVID-19. This appeal has a number of important and critical pillars, like health, food security and nutrition, livelihood, social protection, but we're also looking at ways to bring some investment, but open to innovation. So this appeal will definitely complement the government effort. I'm sure the minister, when he comes in, he will share with the viewers what the MAIF is doing in terms of response, immediate response, but also forward-looking after the COVID. We look at this, someone has mentioned that the COVID has exposed our weaknesses, so we look for this as an opportunity for us to see how we put in place measures, policies, create the right incentive to ensure that our food system is resilient. But this, as I mentioned, the future of Uganda food system depends on this interaction, depends on all the actors that contribute to make this the food system in Uganda more resilient. It's not only the government, but all actors are important to ensure that when it comes to food safety, when it comes to the regulatory aspect, we have the measure in place, because it's not only COVID. We see that COVID, but we see Ebola, we have Rift Valley fever. Those are failures within the food system that really then transform into a health crisis. So it is important that we look at food system in a comprehensive manner, but the regulatory framework is important, the right investment in agriculture to allow the private sector the space for them to do agriculture, and create mechanisms also to regulate the market, but not forgetting the small holders, not forgetting those that are already experiencing food insecurity, because we have a goal of leaving no one behind. So it is important that while we allow the market to function, we are also mindful that we have pockets of food insecurity in the countries that needs to be addressed. We have also issues in terms of nutrition. We have children that are a high percentage of stunting. So we need to put in place a set of policies that also look at school feeding in an integrated manner, and create an opportunity for smallholders to have a market that is consistent, but to have a market that functions well.
Thank you.
We are sure that we'll recover from this pandemic. I am confident that the agriculture sector, particularly in Uganda, because you are blessed by the natural resource, your system is quite diverse. So there is a potential for us to reset certain aspects of food production, but it's not only production, but we have to look at post-harvest for us not to continue to lose food that we put so much effort to produce, but at the same time create an environment that is stable, that allow the farmers to increase their income. We cannot continue to promote agriculture subsistence because it's not only about eating, it's about also income security. So mindful of that, we really have to put investment to push some of our farmers that we know they are about 68%, for them to do this transition from subsistence farming to farming that's more efficient. Here we have to talk about the role of mechanization. We have to talk about how we become more efficient in terms of our labor. We have to talk about how we increase the inputs in agriculture for us to be competitive, not only on the commodities that we export, but also on the commodities that are important for our internal food security, because Uganda does have the potential to also to continue to be the food basket of the region. So the opportunity, even within the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Agreement, opens in this post-COVID as an opportunity. But for us to reach this aim, and this is important that we create the right sets of incentives and go after it. I want to just to come back to some point that I made earlier in terms of some numbers that I presented. It was in the context of the economic contraction that is expected from COVID. The analysis look at the COVID impact on the economy. So it's proposing, the analysis is indicating that we may have a contraction anywhere between 2 to 10%. So if the contraction is 2%, we'll have 14.4 million additional hungry people. If the contraction is 10%, we'll have an additional 8.3 million people going as hungry in the world. But as I mentioned before, we have already 135 million hungry people in the world. Out of this number, half of it live in our continent. And so we have to do something, because this is a continent that really have the highest percentage of Arab land. We have sufficient water. We have the young labor force. So when it comes to food security, there is no reason why the continent continue to be a net food importer, but we do have a potential to be more self-sufficient when it comes to food. But yes, the role of the government and the role of all actors is quite important for us to really achieve this goal.
Thank you. You're talking about the role of government and referring to the minister, because a lot of the things that we need at policy level, policy intervention, right across the chain, the food system chain, is a responsibility that falls squarely in the government hands. And we had confirmation from the minister that Minister Vincent Bamulanga Chisempija, who's the Minister for Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, that he was making it to the studio, I think until about 10 minutes before we went on air. We're still expecting him. So I kept announcing that the minister might join us. It appears he will not be able to make it this evening. But that raises other questions on how at government level are we looking at this, both as the challenges and the threat of COVID-19 and other disasters, but as well as an opportunity to learn from the lessons of COVID-19 to address the challenges in the food supply system. Agnes, let me come to you, and I want the people in studio to help me get Margaret Masudio. Margaret Masudio is a subsistence farmer in Adjumani district. I want to hear from her how things are for a person on the ground. Agnes, let me come to you. You're talking about creation of food and seed banks. That's what Dr. Corrido was talking about. And we talked at the beginning, there was that shift of food security at the market level. So granaries at the homestead level disappeared with the expectation that if you produce, rather than keep this food, you can sell it, keep money in your pocket. When you need, you can go and buy. You're also the one who raised the question of this idea that you sell what you produce to buy what you don't have. So if you need nutritional value, for example, coming from fish, fat that you don't produce on the farm, then you are able to access them from the market. But you realize that this country now, where we are, you can't guarantee with a very fractured system like we have that there will be food in the month of July. Okay, I'll come to you, Margaret, in a moment. If you could just answer that quickly, and then I'll go to Margaret.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Corrido, and our other colleagues on the panel. One thing we need to appreciate is that it is not the food system in Uganda that is resilient. It is actually the smallholder farmers that are resilient. And we have given them a raw deal for decades. I think it is time around to change the rules of the game. It is actually very sad that even when this audit, like Mr. Chimera referred to, is, and the exposure that we have had, we still think that our agriculture and food system shall suffice on Mukama na Ayamba. You know, we are not going to wait on God. It is actually, I think at this moment in time, let me see it and it gets, say it and it gets on the record, that whoever has restrained the Ministry of Agriculture to come to this discussion, you will not see heaven. Because we needed the minister, and we need the minister, and actually the country needs to talk to the government to know. Dr. Corrido has been able to tell the world what, for instance, FAO has in the offing in response to this crisis. But the people out there, we do not know what government is cooking. And yet after cooking it, we are supposed to join it in serving it or making it real. So you will not see heaven, whoever has refrained the minister from getting into this discussion. And I know God hears my prayer. Charles, the mind that has brought us to this situation cannot get us out of this situation. If we are going, the way we have been doing our agriculture, the way we have been governing it, the way we have been dealing and planning for it, cannot. I need to tell people that I had the honor to look at the ministerial policy statement for agriculture for the next financial year 2020-2021. And I was like, how many worlds are we living in? Because looking at the ministerial policy statement, it is setting out what government is planning to do through the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm telling you, COVID had not happened in this country according to that framework. But I believe they are cooking a response plan. That's why I really, and I know there are so many Ugandans that need it. If we think that we are praying for the president to open on Tuesday and we run back to our old ways of doing things, and yet COVID-19 and these other challenges that are emerging into our food system are not allowing us to operate in the old mode, then we are heading this country into a crisis as stakeholders within the sector. So we need to think differently, and I'm appealing publicly on set that we need the government response plan on agriculture and food security in this country being revealed, or else we are better off staying in the lockdown, such that we organize ourselves. So
Minister Vincent Sempicha and your other line ministers and the important people in the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, I believe you're watching and you're listening to listening to Agnes. He says, if the minister, whatever prevented you from making it into the studio, you said...
We do not see heaven.
That's very serious on ED Day.
Yes, yes, because food security, like I said, we have been told that we are going to live with COVID-19. We are better off not thinking about managing it, but we think about adapting to it. The favor that we have had as Africa is because our food system has been, our food is still strong. We are still having our biodiversity, and we can afford the food. That is why we have registered less deaths to COVID-19 than other continents. So we need to come out and fight from where our strength is. We must be seen running faster and, you know, mobilizing the entire crusade, the entire population to join this army that have proved to be the winning army in such crises. So we cannot allow to continue sitting. And for me, as a civil society organization, I can only compliment what government has put on the table. So I'm appealing to NTV that please, once the Ministry of Agriculture comes out and says the response plan is out, please accord them space and they reveal this plan, because we need it as stakeholders to plug
of course,
into it.
We'll remain open here when the minister is available on whatever occasion. We'll provide the platform. But I need to jump in and bring Margaret. Margaret, are you with us? Margaret? Yes, I can see you. Margaret, welcome to this discussion. And how is Adjumani?
Adjumani is so good. We are receiving rain and we are happy about it.
Great. Margaret, if you could bring me up to speed, what is your experience of COVID-19 as a small-scale farmer?
Thank you so much, moderator, for giving us small-scale farmers this golden time to speak to the world, to hear what is happening, how COVID-19 has affected us. The first time we had COVID-19 is confirmed positively in Adjumani, it has created a lot of fears in us, especially us in the village. We were afraid. The moment we step on the roadside, we feel that we are almost getting the disease. Two, this is a very unique situation. Since I'm born, we have never experienced, I've never seen such thing happening, where you are locked down completely, you are not allowed to move anywhere else. Even shops are closed. It is actually very fast thing and very unique. And people never prepared for it. Because as one of the recurrent speakers was saying, issues of granary have died a long time during our grandparents. Right now, people produce food, they put in stores, and for us rural farmers, especially the small-scale farmers, you produce, you sell what is excess, and you budget, you leave something for feeding, and part of it for seeds. But this pandemic caught us unaware. The food we have put to eat, which will take us to the next season, has been consumed, including even the local seeds we have been keeping in our house has been consumed. Now that there is no seed to plant, farmers are really suffering a lot. Another challenge is the extension services. They cannot reach you, you cannot reach them. Because ever since I've been listening to the strategies being put by the government, we have never heard of any program for extension workers, like protecting them, how they should work. We have never had it, and we are facing a lot of issues there. It is hard to access them where you have challenge in regarding agriculture. Transport issue. The small markets around us are being closed up. You have to go a long way. Like me, I have to go 5 kilometers to reach a better market where I can get food. Apart from that, the food price, like beans, we buy a kilo at 6,000, at 8,000, which is extremely expensive. And the middlemen are taking advantage of us, the small-scale farmers, because we do not store, and they're the ones who never suffered to produce the food, have managed to store a lot, and they are now selling it to us expensively, and we are facing that. More so hardship. The issue of social distancing, it is a unique thing. You find in families, people used to talk, interact freely, but this has been affected, and people observe that but it gives a lot of hardship. Access to finance. In our rural communities here, you find farmers, especially women, cannot access financial institutions. Therefore, they opted to have their small groups, saving groups. And these saving groups, because of social distancing, they cannot function. They have been paralyzed. We cannot access finance to do the work in our garden. More so, the labor. You cannot bring more than 10 people in your garden because that affects the measures being put in place. So we have resorted to using family labor, which has affected the work we do. And I think in the future, the impact will be more because food production will be low because labor, we use our small family laborers.
So what are you doing? What are you doing to cope with this situation? What other interventions at that smallholder level? What are you doing to cope with this situation?
We have tried to survive besides the hardship we are getting. Like we have our small gardens where we have seeds which are managed by women. They take decisions over it by themselves, when to use, when to plant, where to plant. Those are the seeds right now we are actually embarking on. Our vegetable seeds, they are quick maturing and they're helping us a lot, especially in our families. At least they give us food to eat within 2 to 3 weeks. Then we also follow the guidelines given by the government, like social distancing, washing hands frequently, and that has also improved the way of this long distance. We have to walk it. If your menstrual is finished, you have to walk the 5 kilometers, and you carry it on your head to your home to feed the family. We utilize the family labor other than now going to get people here and there. But finance is not there. You cannot hire someone from somewhere. You cannot even hire a tractor. So it is really difficult. Then seeds, we buy those seeds which cannot be consumed as grains. We are able to get from our neighbors and we plant them. That is how we are coping up with the situation. Thank you. So it is very hard.
Okay, thank you. Margaret, stay online. I'll come back to you in a moment. I want to come to you, Jane. The many people from the discussion we've been having over the last 1.5 hours, you can tell that you anticipate that there will be a food crisis. We already have some form of food crisis at the moment, but the gravity is different in different areas and to different people. But long term, you expect that there will be a food crisis. How do you think government of Uganda can avert this crisis? Can we say, I think it was Dr. Querido who was talking about creation of food banks, which Agnes also spoke to. Can you use the donations? We hit 28 billion, the contributions to the COVID fund. Part of it is in food, part of it is in cash and other items that are being donated. Do you think it's viable to use some of that to create to create a food bank to cushion the country in future? There was a long discussion about whether we have a functional silos. Those that are owned by government are not existent, but some private people have some silos, and I think World Food Programme and the others. How do we deal with that?
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. First of all, I think it's important that we recognize that apart from the funds that have been collected through these donations, we also have funds which the government has obtained through grants as well as through loans. So we have, I'd say, three areas where funding has been made available. And it's important that those funds are actually targeted to the areas which will enable us to become more food secure. First of all, addressing the immediate needs, as well as becoming more food secure in the medium to long term. Some of the suggestions which have been made, I think, are extremely important and very valid in terms of having the food stores and food reserves. And some of the suggestions, such as having the seed banks, are also very important. And that is something that we have applied in groups that we have worked with in supporting farmers. So we have supported farmers. We've had a project on this since 2016, and it has actually been very beneficial because those farmer groups have now been able to use the seeds that they had established and that they have available and are able to plant during this time when there's a lockdown. So those are I think those are measures that should be taken to scale. They should be countrywide, and so that we work towards ensuring more food security. And I think it definitely, in terms of the funds that have been raised, need to be applied to areas that will have long-term impact on the population and ensure that we have food security. And I also want to say that I think it's important that civil society is part of these discussions and we get involved. Some of the funds which we have obtained, which the country has obtained, this is national debt. It's not government debt, you know, it's national. So we need to have a say. We need to be involved in issues of accountability, even in issues of determining, of being at the table and being able to contribute ideas as to what we think those resources should be applied to, and then following up on accountability, implementation, etc. The last thing I want to say is that I think the issues that Dr. Querido mentioned are very important in terms of the policy framework and many of the ideas that have been generated. But I think we also need to recognize that we do have several policies in place, and we are not sufficiently working towards implementation of those particular policies. So I think this is one of the areas where there is a defined gap which needs to be addressed, and we need to work towards addressing many of these issues which have been articulated in a range of policies and strategies, including the most recent National Development Plan 3. So a number of these issues have actually been raised, but we need to work on implementation. I think that has been recognized as one of the challenges which we have as a country. So we seem to be very good sometimes at development of the policies, but now we need to put the resources.
When we need to put them to where they're supposed to be and put the resources there.
We need the resources to go to these areas.
Agnes called it Mukama na Yamba. Let me just stay with you for a moment, Jen. You just listened to Margaret. She's there watching us.
Yes.
How do you think people like Agnes and others, small-scale farmers, markets women, what's the impact? They already impacted significantly, like just like what Margaret has told us. But from where you sit, you do these studies, you're checking on what is going on. What kind of impact do you think, further impact is this going to have on them?
Well, definitely it has a very big impact on their livelihood security, because as she has indicated, they have several limitations from a production perspective in terms of productivity. There are various limitations that they're facing, and those limitations need to be addressed. They have limitations in terms of access to market. So if they're not able to get their produce to market, then they cannot sell, they cannot earn income. They also have limitations in terms of financing. And I think this is particularly important, not only for farmers per se, women farmers per se, but also women informal traders, because many of them depend on finance, which either they generate through savings or they get from groups. So when they have limitations in accessing finance, then they will not be able to engage in business, or they will not be able to support their agricultural activities.
Margaret told us they've eaten the seed, the seeds for planting. Yes, you're locked down. She said beans have gone up 6,000 up to 8,000 shillings, you can't afford them. So you look back and say, from what I had saved to replant,
Let me eat some.
let me eat some, and then we'll see what happens.
Yes, so that
once the lockdown is over.
Exactly. So that, I think, points to the whole idea that in terms of even a national strategy moving forward as part of the COVID response, we need to see how perhaps has been adopted in some other countries, making finance available to micro and small businesses, to associations, farmer groups, so that they can regain some level of productivity and start to engage in business again, and to improve their livelihoods. I think it's very important, because it's very difficult to see how they will be able to access the kind of resources that they need to restart the work that they were doing.
Agnes, let me come to you. How do we move to better save the food systems from these darkening shadows? I know we don't have the minister here, but I believe that maybe he's watching, or someone will give him a brief after. And there are other systems that are watching all over that can help to on the thinking and informing government. The Crusade you have been on for many years.
Yes, thank you. I think moving forward, this is what I would expect amongst what Minister of Agriculture could be cooking as a response plan for agriculture and food in this country post-COVID and post the locusts and everything that is happening. One, we must move in very fast to reconstruct the seed system. Margaret has ably told us that had we not robbed the power of the communities on the seed system and entrusted it with a private sector that is absent now, with all the reasons to be absent, maybe the farmers would be able to plant, you know, untimely plant. We advised the government in some corners that they needed to dispatch their share of the inputs by mid-April. And that time around, we advised that that dispatch should not contain enterprises that require more than 70 days to mature. So we ended up saying, can we give them the cassava cuttings? Can we give them the potato vines? And then vegetables, like Margaret has ably said. It is very unfortunate that until I came to this show, government had not done that procurement and the dispatchments. So look here, we have had these communities who we told that you'll have seed given to you by government, and now government has not been able to steadily fast move and give the farmers the inputs. So we need to reconstruct that as a matter of urgency. The other aspect is that we must make sure that the agricultural extension function actually is evident and active in the communities. And I appeal to Ministry of Finance. We cannot continue Malaga producing, doing things just for the sake, because food is required not only for food security after COVID, but we also need it to reconstruct the economy. So we must do it systematically. We cannot move again by choice without addressing other issues of productive resources. Can you imagine, even with the minister's directive from Ministry of Lands, people have continued to use their forces on remote, and they are evicting. They are evicting, they are even destroying the small foods that the farmers had produced. The majority of our food producers, who are the farmers, are actually not the landowners. And they have never campaigned to own that land. They only need that land to do us a favor and produce food. They only need user rights. But even as I'm here, I have been given a message that the evictions taking place in Changwari, around those areas. People are evicting, and we are expecting them to produce. So I think we need that other mother ministry to come in. But we also need a significant investment on issues of food safety. It doesn't add up to invest in production, and at the end of the day, the food is ready. The people are saying we are going to eat it, but the Henrys and Dr. Maindo come in and say, this is not fit for your consumption. So we need to invest in technology. The farmers need to have the testing kits for the basics like aflatoxins. We need to really mute the production of equipment that are not food graded, and immediately move very fast to provide alternatives. Uganda has an institution, Nominally Research Center there. They are capable of refabricating food-graded technologies that can be used in food processing. I need to assure you, until when I'm proved wrong, that we're only lucky that the food that was being distributed was only tested for aflatoxins. Had they tested it for foreign material like metal, I'm doubting if we would have distributed.
I attended an event. I attended an event where one of the ministers involved in the distribution in Kampala, the state minister for ICT, Peter Gwang, and he said the only safe food is that UNBS has approved. Otherwise, those of you who are going and picking your food from the market, you're actually eating food that is not fit for human consumption.
It wasn't fair.
Yeah?
That submission isn't fair. Because even the food, actually, we have a very big reason to worry. Because the food that government was distributing, UNBS tested, was picked from the market. And it isn't fair. He would have been fair to say that for those of you who are not receiving food from government, 30% of what you're eating or more than that is unsafe. Because the food government distributed and was tested was from the market.
Yes.
It is the same market.
That
so Uganda, yes. So
but I think he was emphasizing what you're saying and what Kimera has spent his time doing on the question of standards.
Yes.
What we eat. And then I think I picked one other thing from you. If you don't have, and Margaret talked about it, if you don't have a functional extension service system, wrong implements go into the garden.
Lack of storage.
If you don't have an inspector at a level of to deal with post-harvest
across the value chain,
at every stage, then what you come out with that gets to the plate is
and that is why I insisted by saying that yes, I agree, we have all the would-be supporting policies, but the fact that there is nobody responsible for our food in this country. And when we are talking about financing, I have ever had a discussion with the PSST in Ministry of Finance. And he told me, Agnes, I hear you with your food staff, but I don't allocate money to shadows. You know? Who is really, really responsible that is supposed to provide that umbrella oversight of ensuring that the food that is in the food system is safe? We do not want to have a food system that is, a production system that is resilient, and the people are producing, yet what they are producing is not fit for human.
Yes.
It's not fit for human consumption, not even for animal consumption, not even for fertilizer.
Thank you, Agnes. I want to dash quickly to Mr. Kimera. And Mr. Kimera, you will make these comments and also give your concluding remarks, because we have about 10 minutes to get out of here. Yes, we've been here already for close to 2 hours. Kimera, do I have you? A quick one. What do you consider the key standards issue for Uganda's food system?
What I consider is to give standards, to give the minimum requirements that put safe food on the market. This is going to be key for consumer safety and even for trade. The FAO representative mentioned that we are a food basket, will benefit from the region and even for the continental free trade area. But we cannot be competitive if quality culture isn't enshrined in whatever we are doing. Standards provide safeguards to the consumers and facilitate trade. The standards we are looking at are developed nationally, others are harmonized regionally, and even we participate in developing global standards that can facilitate Uganda to participate locally, regionally, and internationally. So our food system needs to be cognizant of quality and standards in whatever level. This is going to enable us participate fully, make the smallholder farmers resilient and get the requisite farm gate prices. Those that are doing aggregating and processing are using food grade, packaging in food grade, and then the consumers get a final product of good quality. This is going to benefit the economy in such a way that a burden of food disease is going to go down. Wastage of resources are going to go down. So this is why I am appealing that as we are looking at all these policy, regulatory framework, control measures, inspection needs to be invested in, doing research, laboratory testing to address issues that Agnes alluded to of aflatoxin and pesticides residues that comes into abuse of using crop protection or antibiotics in animal industry. All these are going to affect us in short, medium, and long term if we do not adhere to quality and minimum standards. So this is very key. Consumers are going to lose trust in the systems that provide food. And the more we get aware as consumers, we'll vote with our wallets. Then what affects the consumer affects the farmer. The farmer will not get the requisite resources. Then they will not be in position to produce. Then we will end up importing quality food. So my appeal, as I wind up, would be that we need to invest in quality infrastructure, implement the regulatory aspects that provide quality. There will have less wastage, low loss, and then we'll have abundant food that can enable us even go beyond post-COVID. My concluding remarks, standards are very key, or quality infrastructure is very key for the food system to be resilient, and then investing in it for it to be implemented, we need to invest in the inspection sector. Jen mentioned it, Doctor mentioned it, and Margaret. Lastly, I'm not going to get an opportunity to speak again. I would like to inform Uganda that next month, irrespective of being in COVID, we are going to have a World Food Safety Day. It is going to be the second time globally it is observed on 7th June. And like the FAO representative mentioned, the food sector requires all players. Government as a duty bearer has got every obligation to make sure it plays a role. Consumers have got a role to play. The food farmers, the food processors have got a role to play. So the theme for this year, food safety is everyone's business. So food provides health care, and we need to look at it so that we are productive and we ensure productivity and resiliency of our country and the global citizenry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry Richard Kimera from Buwate, for joining us and for sharing with us your views, especially from a standards perspective. We have Margaret, Margaret, are you still with us? Margaret, one quick question. What do you think the government should do? What do you think the government should do, either more or better, from the discussion we've been having and from your own, where you sit, where you stand?
Thank you so much. First of all, when the COVID broke out, what is being distributed is food. What is being exported is agricultural products. Then, in those measures, they also emphasize that you have to feed well to boost your immune system. Therefore, I say that I thank the government for putting all the measures to protect us, the community, from getting the COVID-19. However, I urge that they should support us, farmers, in community seed management, community managed seed system, that is the seed bank. Because when such situation comes, we shall be able to get food and produce food for the community. So the extension services, those are our supervisors, people who guide us. And if we don't have them in our community, it pains us, and we can't produce what is best. Therefore, I urge that the government should have budget for the extension services so that we are served and food is produced, our immune is built, we become resistant to COVID-19. Then we also want proper updates on COVID-19 because there are a lot of false information. More so, we have a lot of fears, especially us at the bordering districts. There are a lot of porous routes which are not talked about, and people, especially from South Sudan, come in, and when you look at the positive cases, they are increasing every day. So that one gives us a lot of fear. We want proper protection from that so that we feel protected.
Thank you.
Then, lastly, the prices of agricultural input. Horse we used to buy at 9,000, it is now 15, 19, going to 20. Yes, we need food. We need food in our home. We need food for the country. Even the responsible people steal food. So why don't we talk about agriculture so that we produce enough food for the country? We need food to export. We need agricultural produce to export to get money for the country. Why don't we, when we complain about raising the budget, people say, no. On the other, on health we are doing, on road we are doing this. Today, I think this is the answer from God. We complain of climate change, and today COVID-19 I think has answered us. Now the nature is regaining its original state, and much as it regains, we have our farmers in the districts like Asese, districts like Mayuge. They are being carried out by flood. Their gardens have been flooded. They need support. We are not seeing government looking into that. Minister of Agriculture, our mother, who is supposed to talk on our behalf, we are not hearing their voice. We don't hear information which are supposed to be given us every time. Now farmers do this, farmers plant from this, to that. Is not there. They also quiet. It depends us. So please let those responsible stakeholders wake up. Minister of Agriculture, please talk on our behalf in those.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Margaret.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid time is not my best ally. So, Dr. Corrido, I'm going to give you 1 minute to kind of wrap up, make your last contribution, and then I'll give a minute and another minute here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Margaret, I'm afraid we need to. Yeah, we need to.
I agree with Agnes that our farmers are resilient, and we believe that they were able to, because we have good rains between January and March. Most of our farmers were able to do the planting. Therefore, we look forward to have an assessment in a couple of weeks how the season is evolving. How is the food situation is evolving, for us really to inform the ministries of agriculture on some policies in place.
Thank you.
It is important that we plan for season B. I think the COVID restriction, the COVID restriction measure will be with us for some time. So it is important that we plan better. As for FAO, what we are recommending is that we continue the international free trade or the borders open, that will continue to have the free flow of goods for that not to impact on the local price. It is important that we look for the most vulnerable and assist them with tools, with the seeds that they need for them to continue to plant. It's important that we keep the food system in Uganda alive, despite the fact of the restriction that we have in terms of movement and some that are complicating the food system. But it's important that we keep that alive, because definitely it will, if not, it will impact both the demand and supply with consequences on the price.
Thank you very much.
It is important also that we keep this type of discussion. Margaret, Agnes, and
thank you. I think we can't hear you now, Dr. Querido, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. We lost the voice there from Dr. Querido joining us from Kololo. Jen?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll be very brief.
Yes.
One, we need better coordination between all of the actors involved in this process. So government working with various, the UN agencies involving civil society. So it's very important that there is a degree of coordination and understanding of the issues. And I think there's some of the lessons that we've learned can be brought on board into these discussions. Two, I think I'd like to suggest that we need to revisit the paradigm on agricultural financing. So the whole concept that agricultural financing should largely be left to the private sector, I think, is something that needs to be revisited, and we need to recognize that government has a very important role to play in this process. And with that, it's then very important that those resources are targeted to particular areas. So areas that will improve productivity. Some of the areas include supporting farmers in different ways, diversity of seeds, etc. Areas that will support value chains, because it's not enough for the farmers to produce a primary product and sell it into the market. We need to see the farmers adding value to their product, because this is also about increasing their incomes, so that they have better livelihood security and so that they transition from poverty.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to cut you there. Agnes, you have the last word.
Oh, thank you so much.
Also in under a minute.
Okay. One, I need to appeal that dear government and dear Ministry of Agriculture, for us as stakeholders, we are very enthusiastic. We are only waiting for your leadership and guidance, and we shall get into action. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of hope. There is so many opportunities that are going to open up for our agriculture sector and our food. So we are not doomed, and therefore should just be ready to take advantage. And lastly, the best medicine and vaccine for COVID-19 and such viral infections, and the best soldier is yourself. You are the frontline soldier, and your biggest weapon is your immune system. So please feed yourselves well. Sustainable diets, I think, is the only solution to such. Yes.
I think the president should have joined you when he was doing that food sharing experiment. How much quantity?
The portion.
The portion.
But the meal was not balanced.
Okay.
The meal wasn't balanced.
Thank you very much, viewers. Thank you very much to my panel, Dr. Antonio Querido, the country representative for the Food and Agriculture Organization. Thank you very much, Mr. Henry Richard Kimera, who's a consumer rights activist and standards expert. Thank you very much, Agnes Kirabo, Executive Director at the Food Rights Alliance, FRA. Thank you very much, Jane Irama Ochaya, Interim Country Director at OXFAM Uganda. And thank you very much, Margaret Masudio from Adjumani. So from Adjumani, Buate, Kololo, and here in studio, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the production crew. That was actually some of the members who are here in studio and those who are there in those areas to help bring us Dr. Querido, to bring us Mr. Chimera and to bring us Margaret, and to all our viewers. Once again, Eid Mubarak to all our Muslim brothers and friends. And we look forward to the next phase of the opening up on Tuesday, whatever the government will tell us, as we learn to adapt, you said,
Yes.
to live with
Yes.
COVID-19. From me, it is a good evening.